in slavery, but I am the one who brought you out. God identifies who he is, and God identifies what he has done. He is their deliverer. You remember in slavery they faced all sorts of plagues, and then they finally went to the Red Sea. And when they got to the Red Sea, the children of Israel managed to go through because the sea parted for them. And then as the Egyptian army tried to come after them, the sea collapsed on them. Jesus is saying, hey, I will care for you. You can trust me. I will care for you. And then he opens up and he speaks to them the law so that man can know how to live in peace and how to live in safety. So let's have a look at this. Commandment number 1 is found in verse 3. Genesis 20, verse 3. So commandment number 1 says, you shall have no other what? Have no other gods before me. Commandment 2, don't make yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above or in the waters below. Commandment number 3, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Commandment number 4 says, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You've got 6 days to do all your labour and work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. You'll notice that's quite a big commandment. We'll come back to that. Commandment number 5, verse 12, is honour who? Honour your father and mother. The next commandment, commandment 6, says you shall not kill, you shall not murder. Number 7, you shall not commit adultery. It continues, you shall not steal. Number 9, you shall not bear false witness, or you shall not give false testimony, says is ours. And number 10, don't covet your neighbour's house. Don't covet your neighbour's wife, or his manservant, or his maidservant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbour. So then we have 10 commandments. This is what God wants all his people to follow, to know. That this is his holy law. This is the boundaries that we have set up. And we can choose to follow God's law, or we can choose to go our own way. Interestingly, it's always been this way. There's always been a law that God says you can follow this, or you can go your own way. You remember in heaven, the angels had the choice of following God's way or ignoring it or rebelling against it. And you remember we've talked a number of times about this angel called Lucifer who says, hey God, well basically he says you're not fair. I'm not going to stay within those boundaries. I'm going to get out of them. And so he did. And Lucifer turned himself into the devil. And he came down and he tempted Eve, and he said, listen, did God really say stay within this boundary, that you cannot eat this fruit? He said, well, why would God do that? Why would God put a boundary around there like that? Of course you can eat the fruit. You will not surely die. We've talked extensively about what's happened when Eve believed that lie. And Adam and Eve had a knowledge of God's law in Eden, for that they felt the emotions of shame and guilt after they sinned. And even when we look at Cain, we see Cain became angry because God accepted Abel's offering and not his. The Lord asked him in Genesis 4 verse 6, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, you will not be accepted. But if you do not do what is right, your sin is crouching against the door. You see, God's law had to be in effect at that time, for we are told in Romans 4 verse 15, where there is no law, there is no transgression. Transgression is a big word that simply means the breaking or the violation of any law. And so we see that even before the law was given, the law was in place. Abraham knew and obeyed the law of God. God said he would bless Abraham and his descendants. But then in Genesis 26 verse 5, it says, because Abraham obeyed me and kept my requirements, my commandments, my decrees and my laws. What I'm trying to point out here is the law that we have just read, the holy law of God, seems to be here before God came and gave it in the mountain to the children of Israel. We can think of Joseph and Potiphar's wife, where Potiphar's wife tried to seduce Joseph, and in Genesis 39 verse 9, Joseph said, my master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. Then in verse 9 it says, how then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? He knew that committing adultery was sin way before then. And then, interestingly, in Exodus 16, the Sabbath command. You remember manna was falling from heaven? And when manna fell from heaven, they could collect the manna for 6 days, except on the 7th day. And in Exodus 16, verse 28, it says, how long will you refuse to keep my commandments and my instructions? And then in Exodus 16, verse 13, it says that the people rested on the 7th day. So even before God came and gave these laws, it seems that people knew about it. It seems that perhaps these are eternal laws. So God's law is the eternal standard or right of the universe. And really should it surprise us that God has a law to govern his kingdom. Romans 2 verse 13 says this, for it is not those who hear the law who are righteous in God's sight, but it's those who obey the law who will be declared righteous. Notice, not those who hear it, but it's those who obey it. It's those who do it. And why would we want to do it? Why would we want to obey the laws that God set up? Perhaps the key text tonight is John 14, verse 15. If you love me, you will obey what I command. You will obey or keep my commandments. So the reason that we want to do it is because we love Jesus. We want to follow Jesus. We want to do what he has said. But it's interesting because the commandments themselves are based on something that we need to have a look at. We'll go back to Exodus 20, but have a look with me at Matthew chapter 22. Matthew chapter 22 and verse 35. And this is on page 698. Matthew chapter 2 and verse 35. And this is what it says. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? All right, we've got all the commandments. Jesus, which one's the best? Which one should I keep most? He's kind of saying. And look at the response that Jesus gave in verse 37. Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and the greatest commandment. You want to know what the greatest commandment is? Love God with everything you've got. But then Jesus continues in verse 39. And the second is like it. Love your neighbour as yourself. But have a look at what he says in verse 40. He says, all the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. The two commandments of loving God with everything you've got, and the commandment of loving your neighbour as yourself. So what I want to do now is go back to Genesis and have a look at these 10 commandments again and see how they teach us, see how they're founded in love. The first 4, actually, as I've said, have to do with our relationship with God in Exodus 20, and the last 6 have to do with our relationship with man. So if we truly love God with all our hearts, with all our soul, with all our mind, we'll express that love by keeping the first 4 commandments. Okay, commandment number 1, let's have a look at that again. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. If we drill down into that, what does it really mean? What's it really saying? Well, if we look for the principle behind that, perhaps it's saying that, hey, we want God to be number 1 in our lives. We're going to make God our first and only priority. Or perhaps another word we could use, if we're looking for single words, is loyalty. Loyalty to God. Commandment number 2. You shall not make yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above, or on earth beneath, or in the waters below. In other words, our worship is to be reserved for him and for him alone. When you worship, you need to worship God. So again, the key word there could be worship. Commandment number 3 says this, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guilty who misuses his name. Perhaps here we could say that we are to respect, we are to reverence his holy name. There's the word that we could use, would be reverence.